This is the Protest Movements Paper Conference. Here's our topic. Do protest movements succeed in changing American society? Please examine 3 different protest movements, their goals, methods, and what they accomplish to determine whether protest movements are effective. You may only use protest movements that occurred in the post-World War II world. Examples would be women's rights, African American, Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Vietnam anti-war, environmental animal rights movement, or gay rights. You will be choosing 3 of those examples, whatever 3 interest you the most. So, what we're going to start with is basically where you should start with your research. And that goes down here to where it says body paragraphs and body paragraph organization. What you're trying to do with this particular topic is you're trying to prove that protests, the act of protest itself, actually leads to significant change. And that is how we would define or measure success. In order to do this, you need to prove, and this is where we're going, this 3rd bullet point right here, you need to prove how a specific action made by a protest group caused, or if you're going to make the counter argument, did not cause any measurable change. Measurable change is important. A measurable change would be a protest leading to a new law that would accomplish the goals of that particular protest group. Another thing that could prove that a protest was successful is some sort of statistics, that show how people were actually helped by that particular protest. Now, in order to prove whether a protest is successful or not, you do need to know what the goals of the protest or the protest group are. So, one of the things that you're going to have to do, besides researching for your body paragraphs, is you're also going to have to research for your introduction. I have the basic information that needs to go in your introduction in this section right here. Note, in order to help you, this 2nd bullet point, you need to make sure that you understand the goals and why these different groups are protesting. What are the problems that they're experiencing? For example, most students choose as one of their 3 protest groups African Americans. One of the goals of the African American protest movement was to end legal segregation in the United States. So what you would be looking for is some protest that happened that actually helped contribute to the end of legal segregation in the United States. For example, sit-ins. The sit-in movement helped end legal segregation. So you would then need a quote that talks about the sit-ins and how a particular sit-in actually created a new law. Besides creating new laws, something else that you will find you're going to find examples of Supreme Court cases. Filing a case with the Supreme Court in and of itself is an act of protest. So you will see things like Roe versus Wade as possible search items or examples that you can use. You'll notice I have a few, not all, a few of the possible protest groups or movements that you can choose from. And I have some additional information for you, where you can find information on these groups in your textbook, as well as some key terms or words that you could use to look up in the back of a book, in the index of a book, or you could do searches on a database using these key terms. Generally speaking, some of these protest movements have had more success than others. If you are leaning one way or another in terms of wanting to argue that they were successful or not successful, and you're not sure where to start, I would recommend that you do come and talk to me and I can perhaps guide you, especially if you're thinking of arguing that they are not successful. That one, I'm going to have some really specific recommendations for what your topic should be about. The arguing they're successful, there's a little bit more flexibility and ease with your choices. Okay, now, one of the things that turns the protest movement topic into a tier 2 topic is down here. The protest movement topic in and of itself, many students find interesting and they choose it, even though it is technically, quote unquote, a harder topic. They choose this topic because they really want to spend some time learning about these protest movements and they have an interest in one or more of these groups. What makes it challenging is actually finding the quote that proves the argument, and that is down here. So it says, you must explain how a specific act of protest led to or didn't lead to a specific change in society. For example, the March on Washington directly led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You would need to find a quote that states the March on Washington directly led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There can be no assumptions. You can't just have a quote on the March on Washington or a quote on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You have to have a quote that connects the act of protest to the actual change. So you have to research protests and figure out what they changed. The A in your analysis will be the goal of the group or the problem they are trying to solve, and the B of your analysis is how that protest achieved that goal or solved that problem. Or, if you're arguing it didn't work, how they failed to solve the problem and the problem still existed. I'm going to scroll up for a moment. Up at the top, I just want to note, again, I have chapters of the textbook that cover various protest movements. In addition, there are some lectures that are helpful, especially for the African American Civil Rights Movement. Please note that both of these have asterisks next to them. These do not count as one of your 5 sources, but you can still use them, and they're good for background information in your introduction as well as your analysis. So if you were to use the textbook, that would be a 6th source, and you would need to use 5 additional sources, either outside books or, of course, the databases. In terms of books in the library, there are lots and lots of books on protest movements as well as on these individual protest groups. The librarian is probably going to pull a sampling of some of these books, but I'll be taking you on a tour of the library in class one day and point out some of the areas of the library where you can find additional books depending upon which 3 groups you choose. If you have questions while you're working on this project, of course, I encourage you to ask those questions when we're working on it in class. You can always email me any questions that you may have. And finally, if I have access sessions related to the paper, I highly recommend that you sign up to attend those and ask questions during those. Good luck!